Hey, it's Anthony Whitaker here, and welcome to today's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast. And whether this is your first time or perhaps you're a regular listener, either way, thank you for tuning in today. Now, in case you don't already know, video versions of our podcast are also now available on our YouTube channel. So if you want to put faces to the names, then head on over to Grow My Salon Business on YouTube, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. So with that said, on with today's episode. Now, today's guest is a London-based hairdresser, barber, fellow podcaster, and salon owner, Anthony Laban. Anthony has 2 salons and 2 barbershops. And so today I'm going to talk to him about both the challenges and the opportunities that those very similar but very different businesses present. So in today's podcast, we're going to discuss which of the 2 business models is easier to manage and recruit for, how the barbershop of today is evolving, and why would you have 4 smaller businesses that are in close proximity to each other instead of one bigger space that accommodates them all, and lots more. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Anthony Laban.
Hi, Anthony. Thanks for having me on. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. It's sort of the 2 Anthonys. It's going to be like, who's talking here? But, you're the guest, so you're going to be doing most of the talking. So, okay, listen, I want to jump straight in the deep end and just ask you this question straight up. You've got 2 barbershops and you've got 2 salons. And from what I'm aware, they're in very close proximity. So the first thing I'm thinking of was, well, why doesn't he just have one big salon? Surely that would be easier. So tell us the story behind that.
Sure. For 20 years, I had a huge store. You know, it was 3,000 square feet. At one point, we had 46, 47 staff. We had beauty rooms and a nail bar and a coffee shop and all that kind of shebang, which we had for 20 years. And I think for probably 12 of those, I really enjoyed it. And then I think I just started getting really bored. I found filling a big store relentless. You know, I was constantly pushing to fill that chair, introduce a new stylist, fill them up, cover someone leaving and move their clients over. So I felt like I was playing some sort of game of Jenga, that I was constantly kind of spinning so many plates. And then my lease finished. And so when my lease finished, it was, I handed the building back. I was ready to leave. And there was kind of a little bit of a movement that I was hearing about that was more boutique salon. There were more and more, certainly kind of New York, I was hearing about small boutique salons, and that appealed. So that's where it started. I went off and opened up Anthony Laban Home, which was initially kind of my studio. I just wanted somewhere for me to look after my clients with a technician. And that took off really well very quickly. Within the first year, we were pretty much at capacity. And we realized that although we've only got 4 chairs in there, it had a maximum that we reached fast.
Right. Okay. Let me just ask you one question.
And that was the downside, if you like.
Right. Let me just ask you one thing. I noticed when you were talking about the big salon, you referred to it as a store. Was that a conscious decision? Was there a lot of retail or something that went on in there?
I kind of like I like the word store. I still call all of our stores.
Okay.
I always think of myself more as a kind of store owner, as a shopkeeper.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that role of being kind of in the heart of the community. Yeah. And I think salon never felt like it sat well on me. I don't think I never felt like a salon owner. I like owning a store.
Good. Okay. No, I was just curious because there is a bit of a trend in that direction again at the moment to expand on the offering that you have, the retail offering. And I'm seeing, more salons that are straying into what might have been traditionally other areas. You already mentioned that you did have a coffee shop in there. And so I was just wondering, and now this new one, you just referred to it as Anthony Laban Home. And so I wondered if there was like a different sort of retail vibe going off there, that it wasn't just about, hair. So I've got that wrong, obviously. It is very much a hair salon, but you just like that, calling it Anthony Laban Home as opposed to Anthony Laban Salon, yeah?
Yeah, well, I think with all four having different names, they kind of have their own entity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of differentiate by calling each one by its proper name, if you like.
Okay.
The big store originally was called Anthony Laban.
Right. Okay. And so therein comes another question for me, because, just talking about your two salons at the moment. Well, they're not salons; they're stores. Just talking about your two stores, and we haven't got to the barbering side of things yet. They've got different names, as you just said. So again, I'm curious from a marketing perspective, why has he done that? Surely it would be more cost effective if they both had the name. But knowing you, that there's a very clear reason why you've done that. So talk to us about that, because I believe the second salon you've just called Mint.
That's correct, yeah. So, Anthony Laban Home became Anthony Laban Home because when I shut my old business down, someone nabbed the AnthonyLaban.com. So I needed a new name for the website, and I wanted to keep the name on because obviously it was recognised. And as it was going to be somewhere I worked, I don't feel too much like an atelier kind of guy. Yeah. And so it became Anthony Laban. It was going to be at home, and then it just became Anthony Laban Home.
Right. It's not because you live there.
No, no. I definitely always wanted it to be the place that everyone knew I was working in.
Right. Okay.
And that was where it came from.
Yeah. So
the names given, the other shops got different names really, because I think they had a different. With Mint, I wanted to see a salon run that wasn't reliant on my reputation. Right. I wanted to set up my own competition. Yeah. We opened with a very different price list, looking for a very different audience with a very different marketing. And we nearly called it Anthony Laban Away, but decided against that. And then really Mint's quite a London word for looking good, looking mint.
Yeah, I suppose it is. Yeah, yeah.
And so it became Mint Hair London.
Right. So it wasn't an existing salon that you bought that came available and you thought, well, I may as well own the competition. Was it that, or did you start it from scratch?
Yeah, no, we started it from scratch. It had been an antique shop. So about a year into opening Anthony Laban Home, I was walking to work and walked past the store with a guy who was very aggressively emptying out his shelving units and throwing everything into rubble sacks. Mm. And I stood and had a chat with him. And he shut down. He's like, oh no, he was selling like New England shutters for people's homes' windows. Right. And he just shut the business. I popped my head through the door and had a look, and I was like, this would be a really cute barbershop. And one of the ideas that have come from having the small shop is husbands didn't want to come into this little store that was filled with women getting their highlights done and having colours on and the salon experience. And so the idea became, let's open up this tiny little barbershop. By the time I arrived at work, 20 minutes after my walk started, I'd spoken to the landlady and then I kind of arrived at work and explained to the team that I think we were opening up another shop.
So that was literally on the walk to work. You stumble across something, stick your head in the window, and job done by the time you've walked another couple 100 meters.
Yeah, no, it really was. It was that, and I quite like it when things happen with a kind of naturalness to them. Yeah. It's a very small shop. It's kind of 10-foot square, so it's really tiny. Okay. And we've got 2 barbers' chairs in there. But it became Anthony Laban Barbershop. My wife actually kind of was the one that got involved in setting that and running that for me, as I was still very early days in the salon. So we launched and we put the name all over it, really. So wives would know where to send their husbands or boyfriends and sons, if you like.
Right. Okay. And from a marketing perspective, that
Um,
worked.
yeah, it was great. I mean,
Yeah.
we lost a lot of the guys that came into us,
Yeah.
um, but it became this kind of path that we ended up being separate hairdressing and barber shops.
Yeah.
About 3 years later, the building next door to the Barbers, which was an antique shop, shut down, and the landlady was the same woman. And she asked if I wanted to expand the barber shop into a bigger store.
Mm.
And that was the birth of Mint, where,
Oh, I
again,
get
I'd
it.
arrived at work, spoke to the team, and one of my assistants who worked in the big store, who
Yeah.
joined me at 16, came to me and went, if you're thinking about that shop, I really want to run something. I really want to do something. She felt like she'd
Mm.
kind of outgrown the little boutique. She was kind of in a tiny 4-chair shop. She was in my shadow, I guess. And so we did it. And we put Ellie, who, like I said, had joined me at 16. I trained her. She'd worked with me and she was 24, I think, when we launched Mint.
Okay.
She was
Right.
really involved in the design, the look,
Yeah.
and she wanted to aim it at under 24s. She was like, I want to aim for teens to 24s. I want a kind of hipper, younger crowd.
Okay. So it's been this sort of natural
Yeah.
expansion because is Mint, from what I've seen on your website, is it more color focused than Anthony Laban Home? Or have I read that wrong? It just seemed from
Uh,
what I read that it was more about color.
yeah, I mean, Anthony Laban Home does a huge amount of colour, and we
Mm.
have a very strong colour business. But Mint certainly promotes itself as a kind of fashionable colour salon,
Right.
and have done a lot of work in that kind of birth of when balayage and vivids and all kind of stuff really kind of was hammering around.
Mm.
It really embraced that, and it was right in the hub of all of that.
Right.
So I think its marketing and its imagery is very much like that.
Got it.
Although now at the moment, Mint's growing up, Ellie's still running, and Ellie is now 30, 31. And so she's maturing with her clientele.
Right.
So we are in the process of kind of slight remodel,
Yeah.
and we are promoting them as the colour experts.
Yeah. So how close are the 4 stores?
It's between all 4, it's about a 20-minute walk.
All right. Okay. So it's not that close. Right. So 2 of them are next door to each other, but then the other 2 are spread
Yeah.
out a little bit more than that. Right. Okay. But as the person who owns all 4 of them, who are paying the rent every month to 4 different checks that are getting written out or however you pay it, do you ever stop to think, well, it's whatever thousand for this one, whatever thousand for that one, whatever thousand for the other and the other, add that together, I could get one bigger space. It'd be easier to manage. Do you ever go back to that thought?
I'll be honest with you, I hated, by the time we closed the large shop, I hated it so much
Okay.
that it kind of brings me out in hives, the thought of having
Okay.
a huge kind of palace of hairdressing.
Yeah.
And I love that they all look very different. They have a really different vibe. Each store has kind of their own kind of little family dynamic in them.
Yeah.
And I rarely work in any of the others. I've never worked in Mint. I've only ever worked in one of the barber shops occasionally.
Right. Okay.
So no, I've got no urge. I mean, I think I like the fact that we have these. We've embraced and stayed with the boutique. The clients really like it. They feel really part of it. Whether they're the first client coming into an empty shop or they arrive in the middle of a maelstrom and join a pack shop. They all feel very comfortable in these tiny spaces. The
Right.
biggest shop is, 30 meters square or something.
Okay. So they're all small. Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right.
Yeah.
So you said that you work in Anthony Laban Home. So I'm assuming that you're not a barber. You're not a trained barber. You've sort of come into the industry as a stylist. Is that sort of what your origins are?
Yeah, I mean, I trained as a hairdresser. Yeah, back in I was a hairdresser in the 80s,
Yeah.
and yeah, the 80s we did use quite a lot of clipper work. There was a lot of undercutting, a lot of mohawks, and a lot of short haircuts.
Yeah.
But no, I trained as a stylist, and then having redone the barbershop, God, 11 years ago, I submerged myself in the culture and retrained myself to barbering, working with the barbers and remembering a lot of my barbering skills.
Yeah. Because
But I've gone off and learnt to wet shave and all that kind of thing as well.
right. Okay. So I'm guessing now, 10, 15 years ago, the whole barbering industry completely became so cool and popular again. Were you already in the game at that time, or did you see that, hey, the time is right now, I'm going to get back into the barbershop? I'm just trying to get that sort of timeline right.
Yeah, no, it was definitely before the kind of real kind of tsunami of barbershops started. It still wasn't. It hadn't found a cool space yet. We were unusual when I opened up. We were the only kind of groovy little barbershop. Everything else was much more your kind of £10 clip joint. And that's why I think we found that early success, because we were doing really good quality hair cutting in a kind of barbershop, more traditional looking barbershop space.
Yeah. Okay. So from a business point of view, I mean, you're running these 4 businesses. I'm going to assume that they're 4 separate entities. Are they? Do you get? What I'm asking you is, do you get 4 separate profit and losses?
We have 3.
Right. Okay.
So we have Mint and Anthony Laban run as one company.
Right. Okay.
And the 2 barbershops are 2 separate entities.
Right. So what is more profitable? Is it running a barbershop, or is it running a ladies' salon, for want of a better word?
I mean, I guess collectively, it's where we look at our income. So we have a percentage comes from here, a percentage comes from there. Obviously, with the salons, they're in one company, so we have 7 chairs in that company. So that generates the most amount of turnover, and the most amount of profit.
Right. Okay.
But the 2 barbershops have a lower footprint and still turn profit. Still turn a good profit.
Yeah, but as a sort of a percentage, I'm not asking for a pound value as how much money you make, but as a percentage of the total sales, do you generally find that the barbershop is more profitable or the salons are more profitable?
Yeah, we make more profit per pound from the ladies' salon.
Oh,
definitely.
Okay.
And a lot of that's chemical work. We do so much chemical work that I think the profit line in there is stronger.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because oftentimes people say the opposite. Oftentimes people say the barbershop's more profitable because they don't have all that inventory, and that it's a much more simple business model, and they often spend less on training. There's often not apprentices. There's often not a receptionist. And so I was thinking he's probably going to say the barbershops are more profitable because the ladies' salons tend to have more money invested in training, definitely a lot more inventory on the shelf, and usually a receptionist, whereas the barbershops don't have those things. So I often find that when I talk to people that do have both, that they'll come out and say that it's the barbershop that is more profit per pound or per dollar or whatever your currency is. So that's interesting. So you're color heavy. I agree with you that, color produces a lot of revenue, will come from the color side of things. Sorry, you were going to say something there, yeah?
And well, we don't have any receptionists at all. So in my previous life with the bigger store, we had a reception team of kind of 5 people and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And when we reopened, there just wasn't physically the space to build a reception. And then you kind of go, well, we've got a touch screen. Most people are booking. If we can encourage people to book online, the phone doesn't ring a lot. The bills can be taken in the chair. And so we have no receptionists in any of the stores at all. We do have apprentices in the salons, and we have we kind of quite old school bring them up as colour techs quite quickly.
Yep.
So the apprentices within their first year are what we used to call tinter and permers. So they'll immediately be applying colours and working with clients and kind of earning their keep, if you like.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we always have a young junior apprentice that's coming up who's not profitable, if you like.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, again, that's very
not
interesting.
Carrying a huge amount of staff.
Yeah, sure. Well, someone who's in both areas, you can sort of see where these cost savings can be made, and someone who's been in the industry a long time as well. You were actually telling me a story when we last spoke to each other, a month or so ago, about somebody that you knew who was in business, who was losing a lot of money, and you had that conversation with him, which triggered that question that I just asked you, about, well, why don't you get rid of your front desk person? Why don't you get rid of, like, I forget what it was. You had 2 or 3 things that you said to him. And I remember you said to me that you then bumped into him a month later and he said, oh my God, that's made so much difference. It's really turned my business around, because oftentimes with small salons, you simply can't afford, a front desk person. When people ask me, Anthony, I'm thinking of getting a front desk person, the first question I ask them is, well, how many income producers do you have in the salon? Because I think that as a ballpark, it's really difficult to come down with an exact figure. But unless you've got at least 6 money producers, you simply aren't producing enough revenue to have someone in there as a receptionist, in most salons. So, yeah, it's interesting how, especially these days, with no matter where you are in the world, economically, there's a lot of pressure on small businesses that people are looking at, well, where can savings be made? And it's a shame that, and oftentimes it is about not employing apprentices, etc. And with the tech side of things as well, it's becoming easier and easier to not have a front desk person or have less front desk people, even if you have a big salon, because people can book online, and so much of the payment processing side of stuff is starting to become more and more automated as well. But anyway, I don't want to take over what I wanted to ask you about. I saw also on one of your websites that you have hair replacement systems. And that intrigued me as well, because you don't see a lot of that about. So talk to us about that. What part of your business is that? And how does that work? Obviously, you're a good client yourself.
Well, I think certainly for the barbershop, the Novo Cabela is the company we started working with, a really lovely company.
Yeah.
And initially, lots of conversations that the barbers wanted to bring it in. They wanted me to wear one. They're kind of like, oh my God, if everyone suddenly sees you with this amazing head of hair, we'll have queues.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of used to having my shiny head. It's been a long time.
No, mate, you look good like that. But
we brought it in. So these are I have tried it. It doesn't look right. So we brought it in, and so for the barbers, they're pieces. So they're kind of glue on. You wear them for 6 weeks. The sides and the back is cut in to blend with the piece at the top.
Right.
They're kind of they're real hair. They have a really realistic scalp. You colour match really well. You can swim and gym and all that kind of stuff. And there was a big Instagram and Reels kind of presence of these pieces being put on and taken off. And, oh, the guy looks 50, now he looks 28 and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So we brought that in, and that's kind of found its niche. I mean, it's not a very big part of my business, to be honest with you, but it has an audience. And then with the salons, we always had hair extensions. We have a staff member, Taylor, who's just spent a year really training deeply to be doing hair extensions for women at the beginning of their new hair post-chemo, where their hair's growing back. and it's very short, and they want to get their long hair back. So we find that's again a niche, but it has an audience, and it's another thing we can kind of supply, if you like.
Yeah, and is that a more lucrative side of the business, or not necessarily?
I mean, it is. I mean, it's very. I always think it's very expensive because it's so time heavy.
Yeah,
But you know, when you see what it's doing to these people, and they're very happy to pay for it.
Yeah.
That the payback is worth it both ways, if you like.
Yeah.
So we charge what the stylist would normally charge per hour if they were doing kind of back-to-back haircuts.
Yeah.
And you know, with some of the extensions on new hair can be up to 8 hours. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's interesting. There'll be people listening to this thinking, "Oh my God, is he talking about, you know, toupees and stuff?" And there's that thing that people always say. They always say you can always tell when someone's wearing a toupee, but the answer is no. You only can see the bad ones, because if it was a good one, you wouldn't be able to see. And I've seen some that you just would never. You're like looking at it, and someone's saying it's a toupee or whatever. What is the term you would use? Toupee?
A piece or a hair piece.
Right. Okay.
A hair piece.
A hair piece. Right. Yeah. Toupee. I don't know who uses that word anymore. I don't know where I brought that one up from. But yeah, I mean, I've been told before about he's got a hair piece, and I'm standing there looking at him, and I think I can tell stuff really easily, and you just can't tell. You know, like a really good one. And like you say, they're not cheap, they're expensive. But for people who really want them, the transition from, you know, maybe being a 50-year-old or a 40-year-old or whatever it is. And I mean, you know, there's some guys, I mean, I'll use someone whose name we are all familiar with, and that is Prince William. And I can remember seeing, you know, Prince William in his 20s, and he was seriously balding. And I mean, no, he's not about to all of a sudden, you know, walk out in a press release with a hairpiece on. It just wouldn't work. But I can understand why young guys like that who can afford it would invest in a piece. And I know that there's certain people that, you know, I'm familiar with in the United States who do a lot of that sort of work, and it's extraordinarily lucrative, you know. So yeah. It's interesting. The technology has come a long way.
Yeah, and I think it's the kind of stepping. It's certainly a younger audience. It's not. It's not men my age that are wanting to suddenly, you know, leave the wife, buy a Ferrari, and look like their youth.
Yeah.
These are young guys who are really losing their hair very early on, are going through the kind of, you know, depression, upset, heartbreak, or just kind of lost identity of losing their hair.
Yeah.
And I think it's a bit of a stepping stone. We find a lot of the guys that will try a piece will regain their confidence, feel good again, and will then maybe start the process of a hair transplant. We certainly have that kind. It certainly seems to open up that conversation a lot.
Right.
We speak much more about hair transplants, and the guys are very good at whether you're a good candidate or not for a hair transplant.
Right.
So it does tend to be a stepping stone, but you can really see the difference in people's self-confidence when either they get a piece and they suddenly look like themselves again, or their extensions go in and they suddenly feel they get their kind of femininity back with their long hair after this short crop.
Yeah, got it. Okay. All right. Back to the barbershop versus the salon model. Which of the two is easier to manage? Do they present very different, you know, problems?
Yeah, I mean, the salons do run themselves reasonably well. I think the only problems in the salons generally come because of me, because I'll disrupt. I think naturally I'm a bit of a disruptor, so I do tend to come into work with an idea and will ruin everyone's day by getting them to suddenly shift. I quite like, as a little store, the idea was that we were a small sports car, not a juggernaut.
Yeah.
So if I have an idea, I want to bring it in very quickly.
Yeah.
The barbershops are really smooth running, and then they're not. They're kind of like sheep. You know, the idea that they don't teach anything in veterinary school about sheep because sheep are either alive or they're dead. There's no sheep diseases; they're just done. And with barbershops, they seem to be absolutely fine and they run perfectly, and then they don't.
Right.
And it tends to be like a pal of mine called it a Lancia Delta. Is that right? Italian sports car. When they're running, they're fabulous, and when they're not, they're an absolute pile of metal.
Right. Okay. Got it.
And so we tend to find with 4 stores, one will always need more attention at some point.
Right.
But the problems come along few and far between. And I kind of enjoy it when they do. It gives me an opportunity to muck about a bit more. And because they're all small, they all have a small footprint, they're not expensive, that I've got the opportunity to reinvent. And I quite like that, even if we don't do it too often. I like that option is always there, that we could close the door for 2 or 3 months, revitalize, rechange, rebrand, redo, rehire, and just launch as something else.
Right. Okay.
So and I think that I find quite exciting.
Yeah. With the hiring thing, again, which is easier to recruit for, the barbershop or the ladies' salon? Is there a noticeable difference?
The salons are now pretty much everyone's nearly all homegrown. So we've been going for 10, 11, 12 years. And so we've managed to train people up. So we have, our team are part of the family. They've grown up with us, and we managed to keep them excited and inspired. I've got apprentices that have just qualified that are now extending their barbering training because they want to be able to work in our barbershops. We have apprentices that join us to be hairdressers with the intention that ultimately would they get the opportunity to work in the barbers. So we're kind of creating our own breed. Barbershops, I've always employed, because we employ, so all our staff are employed. We find the barbershop much more difficult because I think we're now on about 70% in the UK of self-employed, certainly in the barbershop industry. And so we'll meet people that want to work with us. We have a good reputation. People come along to meet us, but eventually in the conversation, certainly 7 out of 10 times it will be, I'm self-employed, or I want to be self-employed, or I freelance, which we've never done. We employ.
Right. Okay. That's interesting because, again, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you about, is that do you find a radically different business model? And I'd agree with you that most barbershops, for a very long time, in the UK at the moment, there's been a huge increase in self-employed for lots of different reasons in the ladies' side of the industry. Whereas the barbers' side of the industry, there's traditionally been a lot more self-employed barbers than, ladies' salons. Is that what you've experienced as well over the last 20, 30 years, that the barbershop culture has been more about self-employed all the time. And now it's the ladies' side of the business that people are wanting to transition to being more self-employed. Is that what you've seen happening?
Yeah, certainly it seems to be in the salons now. We're finding more people we meet that want to be self-employed. I think a lot of that is about them possibly not wanting to be full-time, not wanting to do a traditional 5 day, 8-hour days, and feel that there are tax advantages to them being self-employed. I still have great reservations, certainly with the UK, about how that our revenue and customs aren't very clear about what a self-employed hairdresser looks like. And I think while that grey area is still so grey, I don't like grey. I like nice and clean cut. I like nice bright torch light in dark corners. So we've just stuck with employing. And as I say, most of our team are really happy. They have a clientele with us. I think most of the hairdressers and barbers that I meet that want to be self-employed aren't actually carrying a clientele with them. I think that's a different matter. And I think if I was meeting a barber that came along and said, look, I've got, I'm doing 100 clients a week and I need somewhere to work from. And, this is how much I'll pay you to do my clients in your shop. Then that to me is the kind of truest self-employed. Yeah. And then I'm a facilitator of a space. My company, I have the physical building and the marketing and the imagery that clients come to my stores and then trust that I will provide them with great people to do that work.
Yeah.
So I think I've never made that transition. Hey, I'll never say never. Yeah. I think, it's certainly becoming incredibly difficult to meet barbers that understand the benefits of employment and see employers as and probably quite deservedly barbers see owners as the big bad wolf or the kind of thieving boss or whatever beautiful phrase you want to put us on, and don't always see the benefit. We've had a couple of staff leave us recently after a long time, and they've done it because they've managed to get a mortgage, because they've been employed, because they've got pay slips, and they understand that when they go on holiday and they're lying on the beach, they're getting paid. And I think those are the kind of responsibilities an employer should have.
So I just want to go back to something we already touched on before, and that was talking about how the barbering industry has really gone through, a big upheaval. Barbering became cool again 10, 15 years ago. And that's fantastic that it did, because you and I have been in this industry long enough to see, where exactly the opposite happened. So it's great to see, that barbering is cool again. But what I want to ask you is, where is the barbering industry going? So what do you think it's going to look like in 5 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, it really has had a kind of huge explosion. I guess, I've had this conversation a few times with a few people, and it feels like there's been this explosion, and it's starting to settle. There's a school of thought that really believes there'll be a little bit more that's kind of like barberoo, that there'll be more home visits, more barbers on bikes and people turning up in your home and place of work. Yeah. General consensus is there'll be less barber shops on the streets again. That will recede, and there'll be an element of, kind of the strongest surviving. And hopefully the big concern so far is that there's not a lot of barbers being properly trained through. So there's a hope that there'll be one or two of these academies that grows up, if you like, and actually and finds a proper place, as we've seen in the UK with like Tony and Guy and Vida Sassoons. There's been these periods of strong training groups. I think there's room for everybody, and I think there'll be the kind of excitement of all these shops on the high street will recede a little bit, and it'll calm down.
Right. Okay. All right. So
there's some great people up there with some great companies.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I just want to wrap up with two questions I want to ask you about. The first one is, you've been in business a long time. And when you've been in business a long time, you learn a lot. And we've touched on some of this already right at the beginning of this episode. So I wanted to ask you about, what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way? Is there one or two lessons that you would like to pass on, to the 25-year-old version of you, or whatever age it was when you first started in business, that might have saved you a lot of angst and or a lot of money in the process? Like, what's the that was a long-winded way of saying, what's the wisdom that you want to pass
on? I think certainly the kind of HR stuff of taking time out with your team and talking about their careers and really having a proper check-in as to how they feel their career's going, and what you can do to help them. And I think that's something that took me a long time to learn. And whether I get it right now, I don't know. But I think I try and make sure the team know that I'm really interested in them having their future career and it to be as exciting as possible, whether we're part of it or not, and to give them that confidence. and our staff stay, so that's good. Certainly, we use a HR company just because of the minefield, and during my career, that's definitely been something that I found the most headache with. Accountancy, good accountants to clean everything and make sure everything is clean and tidy and presented properly has definitely saved me. And I guess really the two big learns for me in my reincarnation as my new company after a long career has been, don't micromanage. Trust people to do. If you've hired them to do a job, trust them to do it. You don't know better. You hired them because you believed in them. Don't stop. Just support them and listen to them and give them that confidence to be them and what you hired them for. And my biggie after all these years is enjoy it. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. There's a reason why you became a boss, why you became a store owner. Remember those reasons in the year you were leading up to opening it and hang on to those. Just enjoy it.
Okay, yeah, some good wisdom there. I knew you wouldn't let me down.
Sorry.
Very last thing.
A little bit bullet hole, I'm afraid.
No, not at all. Not at all. Last thing I want to ask you about, or I want you to tell us about, is you have a podcast. I know you have a podcast because I was, fortunate enough to be invited to be on it. And that's how we first met. And it's an interesting podcast because you're very focused on the barbering industry. And there's not a lot of podcasts that are just focused on the barbering industry. And it's very UK centric, but you've had a lot of great guests on there. And I really enjoyed it. So just tell us about your podcast and what it's all about, why you did it, and importantly, where people can find out more about it.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, no, you're a great guest. Thank you very much, Anthony. It's the Noble Barber podcast. And we went with Noble, Nobl, but it's Noble because we cut through the crap, and it was wanting to have an honest talk about it. The barbering industry got a little bit overtaken by Instagram, that everyone was showing their best possible life. And I felt it was necessary or important to share the real stories, having experienced opening shops and building up a career and opening columns and doing all that kind of stuff, that I wanted to meet the people behind these cool little shops and why they were doing it and what they had to offer. We've now been going a year. We've met 50 plus people. We've had some amazing conversations from every aspect of the spectrum, from old boys like me who've been doing it from the beginning, so very young lads who've just started. We've met barbers with varieties of neurodiversity, a lot of men's mental health, and there's been some really fascinating and really honest conversations. And I've loved seeing that kind of community, and I think we've been a really big part of building a community in the barbering industry, that barbers feel confident to walk up to each other now that they're at shows and events. And it's been really nice to be in it. I've like I said right at the beginning, I like being a shopkeeper. I feel like we're the heart of everything. I still make sure I'm involved in getting street parties off the ground and running the charities locally and getting involved with Christmas trees going up. And I love that kind of community feel. And the podcast is a kind of extension of that I wanted barbers and guys and girls that were thinking of opening something to have a resource to dip into, find people that they may be associated with, who'd set up the companies that they aspired to or wish they had, and could delve into it and look. And all our guests are always open to answering questions, from direct messaging, and we'll help. So it's been a really revitalizing experience. Good. Because I didn't know any of these guys. I've met 50 new people who have been brilliant.
Yeah, no, that's what I've found. One of the really nice things about doing podcasts is now. I know you're on YouTube with the podcast. Are you on all the other podcast platforms as well, or is it just YouTube centric?
We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on YouTube. We're everywhere you'd normally get your podcast from.
Okay.
The Noble Barber podcast. Please have a listen.
Right. Okay. So whereabouts can people connect with you on Instagram or any other social media channels, or as we've just said, your podcast? So we've already spoken about that. Any other, social media sites you want people to go to?
Well, the easiest way to get me is at Laban Home, Laban Home, or at Mint Hair London. Have a good look round our shops and get in touch with us if you wanted to.
Fantastic. All right. Well, listen, I'll put those links on our website, growmysalonbusiness.com, and in the show notes for today's podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast with Anthony Laban and you've enjoyed it, do me a favor and share it with people who you know who would also enjoy it. And don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcast app. So to wrap up, Anthony Laban, thank you for being on this week's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast. It's been great chatting to you.
Thanks a lot, Anthony.
Cheers.